Hello and welcome. Tonight we're diving headfirst into the celestial soap opera of the ancient Greek gods, a family with more power than sense and more drama than a season finale. Before we get into it, if you appreciate this exploration of myth, please consider giving the video a thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button, and I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see our global audience assemble. All right, settle in, maybe grab a drink. Let's begin our journey into the divine drama club of antiquity. We'll start with the CEO of the cosmos himself, Zeus, god of the sky, chairman of the Olympian board, and the ultimate proof that holding all the power means you have none of the self-control. Zeus was the last-born son of Cronus and Rhea. His father had a rather extreme parenting philosophy. To prevent a prophecy of being overthrown, he decided his children would make a lovely meal, swallowing them one by one. Utterly charming. Rhea, however, had other plans for Zeus. She swapped the baby for a blanket-wrapped stone, a trick Cronus fell for, which suggests he wasn't the most attentive of fathers. Once grown, Zeus waged a cosmic war on his dad, performed some unsolicited stomach-turning surgery, and liberated his siblings Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Hestia, and Demeter. And just like that, the universe's most influential and toxic family was established. After their victory over the Titans, Zeus took the top job. His official duties included managing the heavens, wielding thunder as a divine power tool, and overseeing cosmic law and sworn promises. At least that was the job description. In reality, Zeus spent the majority of his time engaged in creative infidelity, frequently transforming himself into animals to seduce mortals, nymphs, and goddesses. A bull, a swan, a shower of gold. The man's romantic playbook was as varied as it was problematic. He was the C-suite executive who spent his days violating celestial HR policies. His marriage to his sister Hera was a masterclass in dysfunction. His affairs produced a sprawling family tree of demigods, most of whom had profound daddy issues and went on to star in their own epic tragedies. Yet, for all his chaos, Zeus wasn't a total write-off. When he wasn't pursuing a new love interest or zapping mortals for subpar sacrifices, he did act as the ultimate arbiter. He enforced justice when it suited him and punished mortals for hubris, a trait he, of course, had in abundance. Zeus was a paradox, a figure of immense authority and a source of constant scandal. He was both the guardian of order and the primary agent of chaos, the ultimate divine contradiction. Next is Hera, the queen of Olympus and goddess of marriage, family, and childbirth. This is deeply ironic, as her own marriage was the universe's longest-running toxic relationship, a spectacular disaster pulled by golden peacocks. She's not only Zeus's wife but also his sister, because the Olympian family tree is less a tree and more a tangled wreath. Their union was meant to symbolize the pinnacle of divine partnership. Instead, it became a centuries-long saga of betrayal, retaliation, and a frankly alarming number of innocent bystanders being transformed into spiders or constellations. Hera is undeniably powerful, the matriarch of the gods. However, her power is most often expressed through meticulously planned revenge, not against Zeus, the actual source of her problems. That would be too direct. Instead, Hera's rage was a precision-guided missile aimed at the women Zeus pursued and the children they bore. She famously hounded the goddess Leto, preventing her from giving birth on solid ground, and she made it her life's mission to ruin the hero Hercules, starting with a pair of snakes in his crib. It's tempting to sympathize. Imagine being the patron goddess of marital fidelity, while your husband is off inventing new species just to cheat on you. But her coping mechanisms involved generational curses and elaborate, cruel punishments. Since celestial marriage counseling wasn't available, vengeance filled the void. Still, Hera was more than a divine scorekeeper. She was a fierce protector of married women, a guardian of childbirth, and a punisher of broken vows. Major cities like Argos revered her as a foundational force of civilization and order. In essence, Hera was the goddess you prayed to for a stable home, and the one whose wrath you feared if you broke one. She's a compelling figure, the embodiment of queenly dignity, constantly forced to endure public humiliation, holding the heavens together with sheer willpower and righteous fury. Meet Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, and, for reasons that remain creatively obscure, horses. When the cosmos was carved up, Zeus claimed the sky, Hades the underworld, and Poseidon got all the wet parts, a deal he seemed quite pleased with. From his underwater palace, he governed the oceans, commanded legions of sea creatures, and carried his iconic trident, less a dinner fork and more a divine tuning fork for geological disasters. With one strike, he could shatter coastlines or raise new islands from the depths. To mortals, Poseidon was a figure of both reverence and terror. Sailors offered him prayers for safe voyages, and coastal cities were careful to stay on his good side, lest he decide to remodel their port with a tidal wave. But Poseidon was, to put it mildly, emotionally volatile. He had the temperament of a hurricane, calm one moment, terrifyingly destructive the next. He could be a generous creator, but he could also flood an entire kingdom because he felt disrespected at a feast. His most famous tantrum came when he competed with Athena to become the patron deity of a major city. Athena offered the olive tree, a symbol of peace and prosperity. Poseidon struck the Acropolis and offered a saltwater spring, impressive but fundamentally useless. The people chose the olive, and in a fit of divine pique, Poseidon unleashed a flood. He was a god who did not take rejection well. His romantic life was equally turbulent, filled with affairs with nymphs and mortals. One notable encounter with Medusa in Athena's temple ended tragically for her, and with zero consequences for him. Yet despite his stormy disposition, Poseidon was vital. He was a protector of mariners and a force of nature essential to a maritime culture like Greece. But like the ocean he ruled, he was a reminder that beauty and danger often come in the same wave. Now for Hades, Lord of the underworld, let's be clear, this is not the devil. The underworld isn't hell, it's the final gloomy destination for every soul, a cosmic waiting room for eternity. And Hades wasn't evil, he was just overworked and deeply unimpressed with everyone. While his brothers got the sky and the sea, Hades drew the short straw and was put in charge of eternal post-mortem administration. His job was to manage the endless influx of the dead, a thankless task performed in perpetual twilight. Hades governed his realm with a quiet, almost grim professionalism. He wasn't one for dramatic entrances or flashy displays of power. He simply ensured the dead stayed dead, and the cosmic paperwork was filed correctly. He was the ultimate divine bureaucrat. His kingdom, also named Hades, was divided into districts: Elysium for heroes, the fields of Asphodel for the average Joe, and Tartarus for the truly wicked, basically heaven, a ghostly suburb, and a maximum security abyss. And Hades was the warden for all of it. His most famous story involves Persephone, whom he abducted. Definitely not a great first date. But in the strange logic of mythology, Their relationship evolved into a surprisingly stable, if seasonally complicated, marriage. She'd spend half the year with him, ruling the underworld by his side, and the other half on Earth, bringing about spring. It was less a hostage situation and more a divine custody agreement. Hades was also a devoted pet owner. His dog, Cerberus, was a three-headed guard dog with a fearsome bark and an appetite for escapees. Unlike his brothers, Hades was steadfastly monogamous and had no interest in mortal affairs. He stayed in his lane. This is likely why the ancient Greeks rarely built temples to him. They were terrified that even saying his name might get you a one-way ticket to his kingdom. He was the quiet, brooding manager you respected from a distance but never ever wanted to meet in person. Enter Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, craftsmanship, and being the only adult in a room full of impulsive deities. She was the divine incarnation of a well-executed plan in a world run on chaotic whims. Her origin story alone is a testament to her unique nature. After Zeus swallowed her pregnant mother, Medusa, to avert a prophecy, he developed a cataclysmic headache. The solution? A swift blow to the head with an axe. From the wound sprang Athena, fully grown, clad in armor, and ready to chair a committee meeting. From her first moment, Athena was all business, while her half-brother Ares represented the bloodlust and chaos of battle. Athena represented the art of war, strategy, discipline, and winning before the first sword is even drawn. If Ares was a mosh pit, Athena was a game of chess. She was also the patron of artisans, particularly weavers. This might seem like a soft skill until you hear about Arachne, a mortal weaver who boasted she was better than the goddess. Athena challenged her to a contest. Arachne's tapestry was flawless, but its subject, the god's many indiscretions, was an insult. For her talent and her audacity, she was transformed into a spider. The lesson: excel, but do so quietly. Athena famously remained a virgin goddess, swearing off romance and marriage. She had no time for the dramatic entanglements that consumed her family. She was too busy advising heroes, protecting cities, and inventing the chariot. She guided Odysseus through his long journey home and gave Perseus the tools he needed to defeat Medusa. She was the goddess you wanted as your mentor, your general, or your legal counsel. She didn't rage, she reasoned, she didn't conspire, she strategized. She simply and always won. And now for Ares, the Greek god of war, violence, and the part of battle that is just pure, unadulterated carnage. If Athena was the strategist with a map, Ares was the berserker with a blood-soaked axe and no plan whatsoever. He embodied the raw, brutal, and terrifying reality of conflict. When Ares was on the field, you could expect maximum chaos and zero subtlety. Frankly, nobody really liked him. The other Olympians found him abrasive and tiresome. His own father Zeus once declared him the most hateful of all his children. When the god of serial adultery and divine tantrums thinks you're a problem, you know you've messed up. Ares was defined by his arrogance and his explosive temper. The Greeks, who valued cunning and intellect, didn't really admire him. They feared him, but they didn't respect him. His method of warfare was to charge in screaming, a tactic that occasionally worked through sheer intimidation, but usually just resulted in a lot of noise and a messy battlefield. He was, however, the personification of terror itself. His children were Phobos and Deimos, fear and panic, who often accompanied him into battle. He thrived on the adrenaline of a fight and reveled in the clash of bronze. He also had a long-running, very public affair with Aphrodite, the goddess of love. This ended in profound humiliation when her husband Hephaestus caught them in an unbreakable golden net and invited the other gods to come and laugh at their predicament. When the Romans adopted him, they gave him a rebrand as Mars, portraying him as a more disciplined and honorable father of their people, but the Greek Ares remained the hot-blooded, muscle-bound embodiment of violence for its own sake. Still, he did have fire-breathing horses and a pretty cool chariot, so he wasn't a total loss. Meet Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and the kind of romantic entanglement that usually ends with a multi-generational curse or a decade-long war. If you've ever made a terrible decision in the name of passion, you've been under her influence. Her origin is a multiple-choice question depending on your taste for drama. One version says she's the daughter of Zeus. The older, far more bizarre version claims she was born from the sea foam that churned up after Cronus castrated his father Uranus and threw the severed parts into the ocean. It's a strangely violent beginning for the goddess of romance. Aphrodite's beauty was a weapon. Mortals and gods alike found their logic short-circuiting in her presence. She possessed a magical girdle that made her utterly irresistible, which seems like a bit of an unfair advantage. Despite being the goddess of love, her own romantic life was a mess. She was married to Hephaestus, the steady, hard-working god of the forge. However, she famously preferred the company of Ares, the volatile god of war, which says a lot about her type. Their affair was the talk of Olympus, especially after Hephaestus's golden net incident. But she wasn't just about chaotic affairs. Aphrodite also embodied the joyful, life-affirming aspects of love. She blessed unions, inspired artists, and was the force people prayed to when they hoped to win someone's heart. That said, she was not above using her power for petty reasons. She was, after all, the one who kicked off the Trojan War. She promised Helen of Troy, the most beautiful mortal woman, to the Prince Paris in exchange for him naming her the winner of a divine beauty contest. An entire civilization was reduced to ashes because Aphrodite really wanted a golden apple. She is the patron of desire, after all, not of stability. Here we have Hephaestus, the god of fire, blacksmithing, invention, and the only Olympian who seemed to have a regular 9-to-5 job. While the others were scheming and seducing, Hephaestus was in his celestial workshop, hammering out divine weapons and grumbling about his deadlines. His backstory is tragic. In one telling, he was born with a physical deformity, and his mother, Hera, was so horrified she threw him off Mount Olympus. In another, Zeus was the one who tossed him out during an argument. Either way, his childhood involved a long fall and resulted in a permanent limp and a deep-seated resentment of management. Hephaestus eventually got his spot back on Olympus not through begging, but through brilliant passive-aggressive engineering. He built a beautiful golden throne for Hera that once she sat in it, refused to let her go. He would only release her on the condition that he was welcomed back as a full-fledged god. Checkmate. Back on the mountain, he became the indispensable master craftsman. He forged Zeus's lightning bolts, Achilles' impenetrable armor, and nearly every other magical artifact in Greek mythology. If an item was divinely powerful, chances are Hephaestus built it, and yet he was constantly undervalued. His wife, Aphrodite, was notoriously unfaithful. His family treated him like the celestial IT guy, only calling when they needed something fixed. But Hephaestus's revenge was never brutish like Ares's, it was clever. The net he used to trap Aphrodite and Ares wasn't just strong, it was a work of art, designed for maximum public humiliation. Hephaestus is the patron of artisans, inventors, and anyone who has ever fixed a complex problem with sheer ingenuity and spite. He's not glamorous, but he is the god who literally built the glittering world of Olympus. Next up is Hermes, the god of travelers, commerce, thieves, diplomacy, and speaking so quickly you don't realize your wallet is gone until he's in the next town over. He's the deity with winged sandals and the energy of a startup founder who runs on espresso and charm. Hermes was a prodigy of mischief from day one. On the day he was born, he slipped out of his crib, stole his brother Apollo's entire herd of cattle, invented the lyre from a tortoise shell, and was back in his cradle feigning innocence by nightfall. That wasn't a phase, it was his entire personality. Known as the messenger of the gods, his job was far more complex than just delivering mail. He was a divine courier, a psychopomp who guided souls to the underworld, and a guide for heroes in treacherous situations. If a situation was tricky, Hermes was the one to call. He also presided over trade and merchants, which makes sense when you remember he was also the god of thieves. Hermes embodies the art of the deal, smooth talking, and the kind of cleverness that operates in moral gray areas. He's the patron saint of ambassadors, merchants, and anyone trying to talk their way out of a speeding ticket. But he wasn't just a self-serving trickster. Hermes was fiercely loyal when it mattered. He helped Odysseus overcome the enchantress Circe and provided Perseus with the tools to defeat Medusa. He even guided the dead to Hades' realm with a surprising gentleness, showing a serious side to his otherwise restless nature. His signature item was the caduceus, a staff with two snakes twined around it. It's often mistaken for the symbol of medicine, which is ironic, as Hermes was more likely to sell you a miracle cure of questionable origin than to actually heal you. He's the Olympian who gets things done, gets away with it, and is already gone before you can ask any follow-up questions. Now we turn to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, and the sacred laws of nature. She is the reason we have bread, seasons, and the quiet, life-giving power of the earth. When Demeter is content, the world is a vibrant, fruitful paradise. When she is grieving, the world starves. For the most part, she was a serene and grounding presence among the chaotic Olympians. She didn't meddle in wars or petty rivalries, but do not mistake her calm for weakness. Demeter possessed the power to bring civilization to a halt by simply withholding her blessing. And one day, she did. The catalyst was her daughter Persephone, the joy of her life. One afternoon, while Persephone was gathering flowers, the ground split open, and Hades, lord of the dead, emerged and abducted her to be his queen. It was a brutal, non-consensual arrangement. Demeter's grief was cataclysmic. She wandered the earth inconsolable, and in her sorrow she forbade any plant from growing. The crops withered, the fields turned to dust, and humanity faced extinction. Her message to the other gods was clear: no daughter, no harvest. Finally, with mortals on the brink of collapse and the scent of sacrificial smoke dwindling, Zeus had to step in. He brokered a deal. Persephone could return, but because she had eaten a few pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she was bound to return there for a portion of the year. And so, the ancient Greeks explained the seasons. When Persephone is with her mother, Demeter is joyful, and the earth blooms in spring and summer. When her daughter returns to the underworld, Demeter mourns, and the world falls into the cold, barren sleep of autumn and winter. The entire planet's ecosystem is dictated by one goddess's custody schedule and her profound maternal love. At her core, Demeter represents the unbreakable bond between mother and child, the cycle of life and death, and the terrifying power that lies dormant in the earth itself. Enter Dionysus, the god of wine, theater, ecstasy, madness, and the patron of all decisions that begin with the phrase, "Hold my drink." He is the divine permission slip to lose control, wrapped in grapevine and followed by a procession of wild, dancing followers. His birth was, fittingly, pure drama. He was the son of Zeus and a mortal princess, Semele. Hera, in her usual fashion, discovered the affair and tricked Semele into demanding that Zeus reveal his true divine form. The sight instantly incinerated her. Zeus, in a moment of desperate ingenuity, rescued the unborn Dionysus and stitched him into his own thigh to finish gestating. Yes, you heard that right. He was born from Zeus's thigh, a fact that defies biology and cements his status as a divine outsider. Dionysus came of age wandering the world, teaching humanity the art of winemaking and inspiring a form of worship that was less quiet prayer and more wild, ecstatic rave. His followers, the Maenads and Satyrs, would dance through the forests in a frenzy of divine madness, tearing down social conventions and sometimes wild animals. His rites were about liberation, freeing the individual from their rigid identity through wine, music, and performance. The Greek theater, with its masks and emotional catharsis, was born from his festivals. But Dionysus was not just about good times. He had a dark side. If his worship was rejected or his divinity mocked, his punishments were terrifying and deeply theatrical. One king who opposed him was driven mad and torn apart by his own mother. A group of sailors who tried to kidnap him were turned into dolphins. He didn't just get angry, he orchestrated psychological horror. Yet he was also a compassionate figure, particularly for those on the margins of society. He offered a sense of belonging to outcasts and misfits. Dionysus is the god of paradox. He represents both joyful release and destructive chaos, creativity and madness, the divine force that can lead to artistic genius or a complete psychotic break. Meet Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, the moon, and fierce, unapologetic independence, often shown with a silver bow and a look that says, "Don't even think about it." Artemis was one of the few Olympians who operated entirely on her own terms. The twin sister of Apollo, Artemis was born first and immediately helped her mother deliver her brother, establishing her as competent and self-sufficient from minute one. As a child, she asked her father Zeus to grant her a single wish, to remain a virgin forever, free from the obligations of marriage. He agreed, and she spent her immortal life roaming the wild forests, accompanied by a band of nymphs who had also sworn off men and romance. Artemis was known for her purity, but not in a delicate, fragile sense. It was a fierce, untouchable purity. She was the goddess of boundaries, and the penalty for crossing them was severe. The most famous example is the hunter Actaeon, who accidentally saw her bathing in a secluded spring. Instead of a warning, Artemis transformed him into a stag, and he was promptly hunted down and killed by his own hounds. The message was crystal clear. She was a ferocious protector, especially of young girls and wild creatures. While many of the gods viewed mortals as playthings, Artemis was a guardian. She punished those who harmed the innocent or disrespected the natural world, and her justice was swift and unerring. As a lunar goddess, she contrasted with her brother, the sun god. If Apollo was the bright, loud, and public light of day, Artemis was the cool, quiet, and mysterious light of the night. She represented introspection, intuition, and the untamed parts of the world and the soul. Artemis didn't need a throne on Olympus or the drama of divine politics. She needed the forest, the moon, and the freedom to run. She is the archetype of the independent woman, self-reliant, powerful, and completely uninterested in anyone's approval. And then there is Apollo, the god of the sun, music, prophecy, healing, poetry, and basically every other prestigious job on the Olympian roster. If the gods had resumes, Apollo's would be 10 pages long and printed on solid gold. The twin brother of Artemis, Apollo, was the golden boy of Olympus in every sense. He drove the chariot of the sun across the sky each day, literally bringing light to the world. He was a master musician, his lyre capable of charming gods and mortals alike. He was radiant, brilliant, and deeply talented. But underneath that shining exterior was a wellspring of drama. Apollo was incredibly emotional and often reacted to rejection with the grace of a scorned teenager. Take Daphne, a nymph he pursued relentlessly. To escape him, she prayed to be transformed and was turned into a laurel tree. A normal person might move on. Apollo, however, made the laurel his sacred tree and wore its leaves as a crown, a permanent leafy reminder of his romantic failure. He was also the god of prophecy, with his most famous sanctuary at Delphi. There, a priestess known as the Pythia would inhale volcanic fumes and channel his cryptic predictions about the future. The advice was often maddeningly vague, but it shaped the destinies of kings and heroes. His love life was a series of tragic misadventures. Most of those he pursued ended up dead or transformed into plants. When his lover, the Spartan prince Hyacinthus, was killed by a stray discus, a heartbroken Apollo created the hyacinth flower from his blood. For all his flaws, Apollo was also a force for order and healing. He could ward off plagues or send them if angered, and his son Asclepius became the god of medicine. Apollo was a walking contradiction, a being of immense light who cast long, dark shadows. He was the god who could heal you with one hand and strike you down with the other if you gave his latest poem a bad review. Finally, we have Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, home, and domestic tranquility. In the epic drama of Olympus, she was the character who quietly refused every subplot. She was the eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, the first to be devoured by her father, and after his defeat, the last to be freed. This makes her paradoxically both the oldest and the youngest of her siblings. While the other gods vied for power, glory, and romantic conquests, Hestia chose a different path. She swore an oath of eternal virginity and dedicated herself to a single crucial task, tending the sacred fire in the hearth of Olympus. She was even offered one of the 12 thrones, but graciously gave it up for the newcomer, Dionysus, preferring peace and duty over prestige and drama. Her domain was the hearth, which was the absolute center of ancient Greek life. It was where food was cooked, where the family gathered, and where rituals were performed. Every home, temple, and city had a public hearth with a fire that was never allowed to go out, and that flame was Hestia's sacred presence. Because of this, she is a goddess with almost no personal mythology. There are no stories of her arguments, her affairs, or her acts of vengeance. Her power wasn't in action, but in presence. She represented the stability, warmth, and sanctity of the home. She was the goddess of hospitality, ensuring that guests were treated with respect and that the core of civilization, the family unit, remained strong. In a family of chaotic, attention-seeking superstars, Hestia was the quiet, reliable force that held everything together. She didn't need temples or epic poems. Her worship was woven into the fabric of daily life. Every meal began with an offering to her. Every city was built around her flame. She reminds us that sometimes the most powerful force isn't the lightning bolt, but the steady, unwavering flame that keeps the darkness at bay. Persephone stands as one of mythology's most complex figures, a goddess whose identity is cleaved in two by the seasons themselves. She is the essence of spring's first bloom and the silent cold of the grave, a deity of both life and its absence. As the daughter of Demeter, the harvest goddess, her story begins in fields of flowers, steeped in fertility and light. But Greek myths are rarely content with simplicity. One day, Hades, the solitary king of the underworld, laid eyes on her, and in an act of divine and lonely impulse, chose her for his queen. He tore open the earth and took her without courtship or consent. Naturally, Demeter was shattered. Her search for her daughter was frantic and all-consuming. When she learned the truth, her grief turned to a terrible, world-altering rage. She forbade the earth from producing life, plunging humanity into a global famine. The message to the other gods was simple: give me back my daughter, or your worshippers starve. Zeus was forced to intervene, less from compassion and more from a practical concern over the lack of sacrifices. A deal was struck. Persephone could leave the underworld, but on one condition. She must not have consumed any food there, but she had. Just a few pomegranate seeds, a small act that bound her fate to the Dark Kingdom forever. This led to her dual existence. For half the year she would return to her mother, and the world would blossom into spring and summer. For the other half, she would descend to rule beside Hades, bringing on the melancholy of fall and the stillness of winter. The Greeks literally mythologized seasonal affective disorder, but the story doesn't end with her as a perpetual victim. Over time, Persephone grew into her role. She became the formidable and respected Queen of the Dead, a calm, commanding presence in a realm of shades. Mortals who journeyed to the underworld addressed her with reverence, seeking her mercy. Her myth is one of profound transformation, from a maiden among flowers to a powerful ruler of the shadows, embodying the eternal cycle of loss, adaptation, and rebirth. Before Psyche had even learned to braid her own hair, mortals were comparing her to a goddess. By the time she was a woman, the temples of Aphrodite stood neglected, their altars cold, as people journeyed from across the land just to look upon her face. Her beauty wasn't just admired, it was revered. Crowds would part for her as if she were a living deity, whispering that such perfection couldn't possibly be mortal. For Psyche, however, this adoration was a gilded cage. She moved through the world as a beautiful ghost, praised by all but known by none. Men gazed at her as they would a masterpiece in a gallery, flawless, remote, and ultimately not to be touched. Her own family, while proud, grew anxious. Her two older sisters married princes and settled into the warm, tangible lives that Psyche yearned for. But no man dared to ask for the hand of a woman said to rival Aphrodite herself. And that was precisely the problem. The gods did not appreciate competition, least of all Aphrodite. To watch her own worship dwindle while mortals praised a human girl was an intolerable insult. In the goddess's eyes, Psyche wasn't a child of breathtaking beauty. She was an act of cosmic plagiarism. Psyche, oblivious to the divine fury she had inspired, spent her days in solitude. She had never known a lover's embrace or the simple comfort of being seen for who she was, not what she looked like. Her beauty had become her curse, isolating her from the very human connection she desperately craved. She would watch the sunset, wondering if this was her fate, to be a spectacle for the world, but a companion to no one. No mortal could offer a solution until one day a solution was offered. It came not from a suitor, but from a goddess. And it wasn't a proposal of love, it was a promise of revenge. On Mount Olympus, beauty was currency, and Aphrodite was the wealthiest of all. She was the very essence of desire, passion, and allure. But recently, her temples had grown quiet. Her offerings went unmade. The reason? Mortals were now directing their worship to a human girl named Psyche. To Aphrodite, this was not mere disrespect, it was blasphemy. The goddess seethed, her legendary vanity wounded. She had toppled kingdoms for lesser slights. How dare this mortal upstart steal the devotion that was rightfully hers? And so Aphrodite did what she did best. She weaponized desire. She called for her son, Eros. Now, Eros was not the chubby, cherubic figure we imagine. He was the god of love, true, but his was a primal, chaotic force. He ignited passions that defied logic and duty. He made heroes fall for their enemies, and prophets forswear their vows. His arrows were instruments of beautiful, terrifying disruption. Aphrodite's instruction was cruel and specific. Find Psyche and strike her with an arrow that would make her fall in love with the most wretched, grotesque creature imaginable. Let her perfect beauty be chained to something hideous. Let her very name become a joke. Eros, the loyal son, took up his bow. He descended to the mortal world, a shadow in the moonlight, and found Psyche asleep in her bed. The soft light played across her face, and in that moment, Eros, who had orchestrated 1,000,000 love stories, felt his own heart falter. This wasn't just beauty, it was something more. This was wrong. Still, a command was a command. He reached for an arrow, but in his hesitation, his hand brushed against the sharpened tip. A tiny scratch. It was all it took. The god of love had just accidentally shot himself. In that instant, everything changed. Eros was no longer an agent of his mother's vengeance. He was now Psyche's secret admirer, her unseen guardian. But neither of them could possibly know the torment this forbidden love would unleash. For Aphrodite would not tolerate defiance, especially from her own son. Eros vanished into the night, the wound from his own arrow a strange, new fire in his veins. He had ignited love in countless hearts, but had never been burned by it himself. Now, a fierce, protective instinct bloomed within him, a need to shield Psyche from the cruelty of Olympus. But protection required secrecy. If his mother discovered his disobedience, and worse, his love, her wrath would be swift and merciless. So Eros swore a silent oath to love her from a distance. Meanwhile, Psyche's life became a lonely spectacle. The whispers of her beauty were now laced with fear. A divine curse seemed to hang over her. Her father, terrified, journeyed to the oracle of Apollo for answers. The prophecy he received was chilling. Your daughter is destined not for a mortal husband, but for a dreadful creature, a monster so feared that even the gods tremble before it. Take her to the highest mountain peak, dress her as a bride, and leave her to her fate. The kingdom mourned. Psyche, however, felt a strange sense of calm. A monster. Perhaps this was the price for a face that had brought her nothing but isolation. She agreed to the sacrifice, not with bravery, but with a quiet exhaustion. She had been treated like a goddess, but never loved as a woman. Perhaps this monstrous end was a form of balance. Eros watched from on high, his plan now tangled in the cruel threads of prophecy. He had to act. He could not reveal himself, but he could not abandon her. So he devised a new plan. He would become her invisible husband. He would spirit her away to a hidden valley, to a palace built of dreams and magic. He would give her everything except his name and his face, because the truth he knew would destroy them both. Even the god of love feared a broken heart. The wind that swept Psyche from the mountaintop was not violent, but strangely gentle. She had steeled herself for the claws of a beast, but found instead a soft, silent embrace. When she opened her eyes, she stood in a valley untouched by time, before a palace that seemed woven from moonlight mist. It was more magnificent than any mortal creation. Hesitantly, she entered. Unseen hands guided her, bathing her, dressing her in silks, and serving her a feast on a table that filled itself. There was no fear here, only a profound and peaceful solitude. That night, in the darkness of her chamber, a voice spoke to her, warm, deep, and impossibly kind. "You are home now," it said. "You are safe." It was her husband, the monster from the prophecy, but there was no monstrosity in his touch, only tenderness. He came to her only under the cloak of night, and was always gone before the first light of dawn. She never saw his face. She fell in love with his voice, his mind, his gentle hands. It was an intimacy of the soul, unburdened by sight. But he made one solemn request. "You must never ever try to see me." "Why?" she asked once. The voice grew tense. "Because trust, once broken, can never be fully mended. If you see my face, I will be lost to you forever." She promised, but the question lingered. How could this gentle soul be the monster of the prophecy? Why did love need to hide in the shadows? Psyche tried to ignore the whispers of doubt, telling herself that what she had was enough. But the human heart is hungry for truth, and that hunger can easily be poisoned, especially by the sweet-sounding words of jealous sisters. Weeks turned to months in the enchanted palace. Psyche had every luxury, but she was deeply lonely. The isolation began to weigh on her. Then one day, her husband's voice was laced with sorrow. "Your sisters are coming," he warned. "They will say they love you, but they carry poison on their tongues." But Psyche ached for her family, for a link to the world she had lost. She begged him to let them visit. Eros, unable to refuse her anything, reluctantly agreed. "But be warned," he pleaded. "Do not let their envy corrupt what we have." The wind brought her sisters to the palace gates. They stared, slack-jawed, at the splendor surrounding Psyche. She was not a sacrifice. She was a queen, glowing with happiness and draped in fabric spun from gold. They hugged her, their smiles brittle with envy. "But where is your husband?" one sister asked, her eyes darting around the empty halls. "He is a great man, but he prefers his privacy," Psyche replied carefully. "He comes only at night." The sisters exchanged a look. "You've never seen his face?" The question hung in the air. Psyche's silence was all the answer they needed. "Psyche," the other sister said, her voice dripping with false concern. "What if the oracle was right? What if he is a monster hiding his hideous form from you? Or worse, what if he is a god toying with you for his own amusement?" Every word was a carefully aimed dart. "He keeps you a prisoner in this gilded cage, Psyche. Is that love or ownership?" The seed of doubt had been planted. As they departed, they offered their solution. "Take a lamp tonight and a sharp knife. See the truth for yourself. If he is a monster, you must protect yourself. Psyche stood alone as they left, the sisters' whispers echoing in her mind. For the first time, her perfect paradise felt like a beautiful, terrifying prison. That night, Psyche lay awake, her husband's steady breath a gentle rhythm beside her in the dark. But her sister's words were a drumbeat in her mind. What if he's a monster? What if he's lying? She had offered him her heart, her body, her complete trust. But was it trust, or was it blindness? She rose from the bed, her movements as silent as a moth's. In her hands she held an oil lamp and a small dagger, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. She crept to his side of the bed, her hand trembling as she raised the lamp. The light fell upon his face, and she let out a strangled gasp. It was no monster. It was a being of such breathtaking beauty that she nearly dropped the lamp. Golden curls, perfect lips, and folded behind him, a pair of magnificent feathered wings. It was Eros himself, the god of love. Tears of relief and shame filled her eyes. He had not deceived her. He had protected her. Overcome with remorse, she leaned in to kiss him, to apologize before extinguishing the light. But in that moment, a drop of hot oil from the lamp fell onto his shoulder. He awoke with a cry, not of pain, but of betrayal. His eyes met hers, filled with a sorrow so deep it shattered her heart. "You broke your promise," he whispered, his voice hollowed out by grief. "You chose doubt over faith." "I'm sorry," she wept, "but it was too late. Love cannot live where there is no trust," he said, and as he spoke, he began to fade. The palace around them dissolved into mist. The silken sheets turned to dust. In an instant, she was alone on a cold, barren hillside, the lamp still clutched in her hand. She had finally seen the face of love, only to lose it forever. Psyche was adrift in a world that had lost its color. The magical palace was gone. The voice in the dark was silenced. All that remained was the crushing weight of her own doubt. She wandered the earth, calling his name into the wind, but only silence answered. In her despair, she sought out anyone who might help her, eventually arriving at a temple, not to pray for a miracle, but to surrender to the source of her suffering, Aphrodite. She knew the goddess hated her. She knew this path would likely lead to ruin, but it was the only path that might, however faintly, lead back to Eros. She found Aphrodite in a courtyard, admiring her own reflection. The goddess didn't even turn as Psyche approached. "So, the mortal who dared to touch my son has come crawling back," she said, her voice like ice. Psyche fell to her knees. "I love him. I'll do anything to prove it." A cruel smile played on Aphrodite's lips. "Anything? Love is not a word, little mortal. It is a trial. You wish to earn back my son? Then you will earn it through suffering. You will complete a series of tasks for me, impossible tasks. And if you survive, perhaps, just perhaps, you will be worthy." Psyche looked up, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "I accept." And so began her labors, a journey designed not to test her strength, but the endurance of her soul. Aphrodite did not make her wait. The goddess led Psyche to a granary where a chaotic mountain of mixed grains and seeds lay piled on the floor. Wheat, barley, poppy seeds, lentils, all jumbled together. "Sort them," Aphrodite commanded with a bored wave of her hand. "Each into its own pile. Have it done by sunset." Psyche stared at the heap. It was a task for 100 hands, not 2. Her spirit sank. She knelt and began to sort, one tiny seed at a time, her tears falling among the grains. But as she worked, a tiny ant, then another, and then a whole army of them emerged from a crack in the floor. Taking pity on her, the colony swarmed the pile. In a display of incredible organized labor, they separated the entire mountain of seeds into neat, perfect piles. When Aphrodite returned, she found the task completed. She was not pleased. "You cheated," she hissed. "You had help." Psyche simply bowed her head. The first trial was over, but Aphrodite's cruelty was just beginning. For the second task, Aphrodite pointed to a distant meadow where a flock of golden-fleeced rams grazed by a river. They were beautiful, but notoriously vicious, known to gore any creature that entered their territory. "Bring me a hank of their wool," the goddess said with a smirk. Psyche approached the river, her heart sinking as she watched the violent rams. But as she despaired, a voice from the reeds whispered to her. It was a river spirit. "Do not approach them now in the heat of the sun, for they are filled with rage," it advised. "Wait until dusk, when they rest. Then you may gather the golden tufts of wool that have caught on the thorny bushes along the path." Psyche followed the advice. As evening fell, she carefully collected the snagged wool without disturbing the sleeping rams. She returned to Aphrodite with the golden fleece. The goddess was furious that the mortal had succeeded again, but her resolve only hardened. Aphrodite's patience was wearing thin. "For your third task," she declared, "you will fetch me a vial of water from the river Styx." This was a death sentence. The Styx flowed through the underworld, and its waters were poisonous to mortals. The cliffs surrounding it were impossibly steep and guarded by winged monsters. Psyche made her way to the treacherous cliffs, knowing this was the end. But as she stood at the precipice, an eagle, the sacred bird of Zeus, swooped down from the sky. Perhaps Zeus was repaying a favor to Eros, or perhaps he was simply impressed by the mortal's courage. The eagle took the vial from her hand, expertly navigated the dangerous winds and guardians, filled it with the black water of the Styx, and returned it to her. When Psyche presented the vial to Aphrodite, the goddess was momentarily speechless. The mortal girl refused to fail. There was only one place left to send her, a place from which no mortal had ever returned. "Your final task," Aphrodite said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "is to journey into the underworld itself. You will go to Queen Persephone and ask her for a small portion of her beauty, as mine has been worn away by the stress of dealing with you. Bring it to me in this box." It was the ultimate test. Guided by mysterious whispers that taught her how to placate the guardians of the dead, coins for the ferryman Charon, honey cakes for the three-headed dog Cerberus, Psyche descended into the land of shadows. Persephone, the grim but not unkind queen, heard her plea. She gave Psyche a sealed box but warned her, "Whatever you do, do not open it." Psyche made the perilous journey back to the world of the living, the box heavy in her hands. But as she neared the surface, the old doubt returned. What if a touch of divine beauty was all she needed to truly be worthy of Eros? Consumed by curiosity and insecurity, just as she stepped back into the sunlight, she opened the box. It contained no beauty. It contained a deep, death-like sleep, a slumber from the deepest part of the underworld. Psyche collapsed, lifeless, on the threshold between worlds. This might have been the end. But Eros, his wound finally healed, had been watching. He could no longer bear to see her suffer. Defying his mother, he flew from Olympus and found Psyche's still form. Tears of love and regret fell from his eyes. He gently gathered the dark sleep from her body and returned it to the box. Then he touched her with the tip of his arrow, waking her. Her eyes fluttered open, and fell upon his face. "You came back," she breathed. "I never left," he whispered. He flew with her directly to Olympus and pleaded their case before Zeus himself. Aphrodite raged, but Zeus, moved by a love that had literally conquered death, silenced her. He offered Psyche a cup of ambrosia, the drink of the gods. "Drink this," the king of gods declared, "and become immortal. You have proven that a mortal soul can be as strong as any god's." Psyche drank, and a divine light filled her. She was no longer a mortal, but a goddess. Aphrodite was finally placated, and a great wedding feast was held. Psyche, whose name means soul, was officially united with Eros, love. Their union proved that true love is not a gift, but a trial, one that requires the soul to journey through the darkest places and emerge transformed. And from their marriage, a daughter was born, Hedone, the personification of pleasure and bliss. And so the tale of Eros and Psyche became more than a myth. It became an allegory. It was a story about the soul's journey through suffering to find union with love. Psyche, who began as a beautiful mortal cursed by her own appearance, had been tested, broken, and reforged. She had earned her divinity not through power or trickery, but through endurance. Even Aphrodite, in time, came to see her not as a rival, but as a reflection of love's true nature. For Psyche had proven that love is not just about beauty and desire, but about courage, forgiveness, and the will to face the underworld for the sake of another. In the temples and homes of the ancient world, her story was told as a message of hope. It whispered that the soul, or psyche, must endure trials to achieve true happiness. It taught that doubt is the greatest poison to love, but that even after the deepest betrayal, redemption is possible. Their story lives on, woven into the very fabric of our language. Psychology is the study of the soul. Her journey from a cursed beauty to a goddess of the soul is a timeless map of the human heart. It reminds us that love is not an easy path. It is a series of impossible tasks. But for those who refuse to give up, it leads eventually to immortality. Long before she was a monster, Medusa was a maiden. Her beauty was not a challenge or an invitation. It was a quiet, profound fact, like the depth of the sea or the silence of the stars. Her hair was a cascade of dark silk, and her eyes held a gentle gravity that could still the hearts of powerful men. She was born mortal into a family of immortal monsters, the Gorgons. Her sisters, Steno and Euryale, were fearsome from birth. Medusa, however, was different. She was fragile. She could be broken, and this mortality, perhaps, was the source of her grace. She desired no power, no suitors, no earthly glory. Instead, she chose a life of pious devotion, becoming a priestess in the temple of Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom. In that gleaming marble sanctuary, Medusa dedicated her life to service. She took a vow of celibacy, honoring the goddess she admired for her strength, her independence, and her removal from the chaotic passions that ruled the world. Her devotion was so pure that worshippers often mistook her for a living embodiment of the goddess herself. Her quiet beauty became synonymous with the temple's sanctity. But in a world governed by the whims of gods, no sanctuary is truly safe. Word of the beautiful priestess spread beyond the mortal realm, reaching the ears of the Olympians. And one god in particular began to watch her, not a god of wisdom or restraint, but one of untamed appetites and oceanic power. Medusa had built her life on the foundations of purity and faith, but fate was about to demonstrate that in the face of divine desire, Such foundations are as fragile as sand. Deep beneath the waves, Poseidon, lord of the sea, was a being of immense power and unchecked impulse. He had conquered sea monsters and sired heroes, but his gaze now fell upon the one thing he could not have, the sworn virgin priestess of his niece, Athena. It was Medusa's untouchable purity that drew him. She was devoted to a goddess, not a god, and had walled herself off from the world of desire. For Poseidon, this was not a boundary to be respected, but a challenge to be conquered. One evening he rose from the ocean and entered Athena's temple. Gods do not need to ask for entry. He walked the sacred halls, the salt water from his body staining the pristine marble floors. Medusa was alone, performing her evening rites. She cried out to her goddess for protection, but the heavens were silent. She tried to flee, but the temple, once her refuge, became her trap. There, on the cold stone floor, directly beneath the statue of the virgin goddess she had served so faithfully, Poseidon assaulted her. When it was done, he disappeared back into the sea, leaving behind only the scent of salt and the sound of a woman's weeping. Medusa lay broken at the feet of her goddess's statue, waiting for a justice that would never come. Athena did appear, but her eyes, which were meant to hold wisdom, held only cold, furious pride. Her sacred space had been violated, and in the twisted logic of an offended god, the blame fell not on the powerful male deity who had committed the crime, but on the mortal woman who was the evidence of it. Whether she believed Medusa was a willing participant or simply a messy complication didn't matter. The temple's purity was stained, and a price had to be paid. The goddess of wisdom chose her target, and it was not Poseidon. When Athena descended, the air in the temple grew cold. Medusa looked up, expecting solace, but found only condemnation. To the goddess, the desecration of her sacred space was an unforgivable insult, and Medusa was the living symbol of that shame. Athena's punishment was not swift or merciful. It was a creative, soul-destroying act of cruelty. "You have brought this profanity into my home," the goddess declared, her voice echoing off the marble. "Your beauty has caused this desecration, so I will make that beauty a curse." She reached out, and with a single touch, the transformation began. Medusa's beautiful hair writhed and thickened, twisting into a nest of venomous serpents. Her skin turned a sickly, reptilian hue, but the cruelest change was reserved for her eyes. Her gaze, once gentle, was now imbued with a terrible power. Anyone who met it would instantly be turned to stone. It was not a defense. It was a sentence of absolute, eternal isolation. She could never again look upon a living thing without destroying it. Athena watched, unmoved, as her once devout priestess became a monster. Medusa fled the temple, her own hissing hair a terrifying chorus, leaving a trail of petrified birds and insects in her wake. She was cast out, exiled not for a sin she had committed, but for one she had endured. The goddess of wisdom had made her judgment. It was not just, it was final. Driven from civilization, Medusa found refuge on a remote, desolate island at the edge of the known world. Her new life was a study in solitude. Every living thing that strayed into her path, a curious deer, a soaring hawk, became another silent stone monument to her curse. The cave she called home was a gallery of her accidental victims. She no longer cried. The girl who had once prayed to Athena was gone, destroyed on that temple floor. In her place was something hardened, a being forged in the crucible of divine betrayal. Her serpent hair became her only companions, their hisses warning her of approaching ships. For men did come, heroes they called themselves, seeking fame and glory by slaying the monster. They came with swords and bravado, believing the stories that she was a creature of pure evil. None of them left. They saw her face for a single fatal moment and became another statue in her lonely garden. With each victory, she felt her own humanity slipping away, replaced by the very monstrousness the world had assigned to her. She was a survivor, but her survival was a form of damnation. She was utterly, completely alone, trapped in a prison made of her own face, and the gods who had created her had long since forgotten she ever had a name. Back in the world of men, Medusa's story was being rewritten. The tale of a wronged priestess was erased, replaced by the far more convenient myth of a terrifying gorgon. Poets and priests stripped her of her humanity, editing out the roles of Poseidon and Athena to protect the pristine reputations of the gods. She became a convenient boogeyman, a cautionary tale about female vanity and monstrousness. Her face was carved onto shields and temple facades as an apotropaic symbol, a ward against evil, her own image weaponized by the very system that had condemned her. And yet, in hushed corners, another version of her story survived. Among women, in whispers, she was not a monster but a symbol of righteous fury, a guardian for those who had been wronged. They saw her gaze not as a curse, but as a terrible, powerful form of justice. Medusa, on her island, knew nothing of this. She only knew that the ships kept coming, carrying men who wanted her head as a trophy. She had become a legend, but she had lost herself in the process. And a new hero, a boy born of a golden shower and a prophecy, was already preparing to be her final visitor. While Medusa was defined by her isolation, a young man named Perseus was being shaped by prophecy. Born to Danae after she was visited by Zeus in a shower of gold, Perseus was cast out to sea as an infant by a fearful king. He survived and grew up strong and clever, but poor and unknown. The king of the land where he washed ashore, Polydectes, desired his mother and saw Perseus as an obstacle. To get rid of him, the king devised a public challenge. He demanded Perseus bring him the head of the gorgon Medusa. It was meant to be a fatal errand, but Perseus was a son of Zeus, and the gods, particularly Athena, saw an opportunity. They armed him for his quest. Hermes gave him winged sandals. Hades lent him a helm of invisibility. And Athena, in an act of staggering irony, gave him a polished mirrored shield and advice on how to kill the very monster she had created. Perseus was a pawn in a divine game, a tool to clean up a messy chapter in the Olympian history. He was told he was hunting a monster. No one told him he was being sent to kill a victim. Guided by divine whispers, Perseus flew to the cursed island. The silence was absolute. The shores were littered with the petrified forms of warriors and adventurers, their faces locked in expressions of shock. Using the mirrored shield to see, he entered Medusa's cave. He found her not raging but asleep, her form curled up in a posture of defense. The snakes in her hair stirred, sensing his presence. In the reflection, her face was not monstrous. It was tragic. A profound sadness was etched there, even in sleep. For a moment, Perseus hesitated. This was not the creature of legend, but he thought of the king's mockery, of the glory promised to him. He was a hero on a hero's quest, and so, looking only at her reflection, he raised his sword. The blade, forged by Hephaestus, swung true. With a single, silent stroke, he severed her head from her body. The curse was broken. The monster was dead. But the story was far from over. Perseus placed the still potent head in a special satchel and fled the island. The gaze of the severed head could still turn flesh to stone. It was no longer a curse, it was a weapon. He flew on, his journey taking him across the world. He rescued the princess Andromeda from a sea monster, petrifying the beast with Medusa's gaze. The power that had once been Medusa's torment was now the source of his heroism. When he returned home, he found King Polydectes still harassing his mother. Perseus strode into the court, unveiled the head, and turned the king and his followers into a permanent stone testament to their own arrogance. He was hailed as a hero, a slayer of monsters. His name was sung in epics. He had used Medusa's head to bring about justice, but it was a justice she herself had never been afforded. In the end, Perseus presented the head to Athena, who mounted it on her shield, the Aegis. The face of the woman she had cursed now became her ultimate symbol of power, a warning to all who dared to challenge her. And so Medusa's transformation was complete, from maiden to priestess, from victim to monster, from monster to weapon, and finally to icon. Her face, frozen in a silent scream on Athena's shield, became one of the most enduring images from antiquity. To most, it was a symbol of terror, but over the centuries, her story began to be re-examined. People started to look past the snakes and see the woman. They began to question the narrative written by the victors. Was she a monster, or was she a survivor whose rage was the only weapon she had left? Was her petrifying gaze a curse, or was it a defense mechanism born of unimaginable trauma? Today, Medusa has been reclaimed by many as a symbol of female rage and survival. Her image is no longer just a warning to men, but a symbol of power for women who have been silenced, shamed, and wronged. She is a reminder that myths are not just stories, they are battlegrounds where the truth is constantly being fought over, and Medusa's truth, once buried, has finally begun to turn her oppressors to stone.